Dusty's discovery. Jebediah cursed under his breath, swatting at a persistent mosquito buzzing near his ear. Dusty, blast it all, where are you dragging me now? Prime Deer Country's back that way. The Hound, a scruffy mix of blue tick and something wilder, only whined in response, his tail a frantic blur against the undergrowth. Jebediah, rifle slung over his shoulder, reluctantly followed the dog's unwavering lead, the dry leaves crunching accusingly under his heavy boots. He was losing daylight and patience both. The terrain shifted abruptly. One moment they were threading through familiar pines, the next Dusty was skidding down a steep embankment, vanishing into a ravine choked with thorny bushes and the skeletal remains of dead trees. Jebediah cautiously descended, grabbing at exposed roots for purchase. The air here was damp and still, thick with the smell of decay. Then he saw it. Or rather, what was left of it. An overturned wagon lay splintered amongst the rocks, one wheel spinning lazily in the air. Canvas ripped and faded hung like tattered flags, revealing the wagon's dark interior. Dusty was already there, barking frantically at something within. Jebediah pushed aside a splintered plank and peered inside. A young woman lay tangled amongst scattered packages and personal belongings. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and blood, her breathing shallow and raspy. A dark stain bloomed on the bodice of her simple cotton dress. He recognized the faint scent of lavender and something else, something vaguely medicinal. Lord have mercy, he breathed, his annoyance forgotten. She's barely alive. He reached inside, gently touching her wrist, feeling for a pulse that fluttered like a trapped bird. He had to get her back to the cabin. Now. A glimmer of hope. The wind gnawed at Jebediah's exposed skin as he trudged through the deepening snow, Clara cradled in his arms. Her slight weight surprised him, she felt like a bundled sparrow. He focused on the flickering light of his cabin window, a beacon promising warmth and respite from the storm's fury. He kicked the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. He laid Clara gently on his cot, its lumpy mattress the softest thing in the cabin. First, the bleeding. He grabbed his waterskin and a clean rag, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he dabbed at the cuts on her face and arms. They were shallow, thankfully. He coaxed a spoonful of broth between her pale lips, watching as she swallowed weakly. He piled blankets around her, the wool rough against her skin, but necessary. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving a world blanketed in pristine white. Clara stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding their depths. Where, she croaked, her voice raspy. You're safe, Jebediah said, his voice gruff but reassuring. My cabin. She struggled to sit up, wincing. I remember the river. The ice, you were lucky I found you. I am Clara, she said, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond him. Clara from Boston. I was going to marry Silas. Her voice broke and a single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He sent for me. Whispers of the past. The fever had broken, leaving Clara pale but lucid. Jebediah watched her eat the broth he'd made, her movements still slow and deliberate. He was glad she was recovering, but a disquiet settled in his gut. She spoke of the weather, the wildflowers pushing through the dry earth, anything but her life before arriving in the West. You never talk about your family, Clara, he said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She stiffened, her spoon clattering against the bowl. There's not much to tell, Jebediah. It's all behind me. Her gaze drifted towards the window, focusing on the distant, hazy mountains. He noticed her sleep was far from restful. Nightmares plagued her, filled with whispered cries and frantic movements. He'd often find her tangled in the sheets, a sheen of sweat on her brow, though she never remembered them in the morning. One evening he tried again. Your ma and pa, did they live in the city? Clara busied herself mending a tear in her dress, her needle flashing in the lamplight. They're gone, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. A long time ago. Jebediah leaned back in his chair, studying her. There was a wall around her, built brick by brick from unspoken words and averted gazes. He felt a growing unease, a prickling sense that the woman he'd rescued was a carefully constructed facade, hiding something dark and dangerous beneath. He had saved her, but from what? And what had she left behind? An unexpected affection. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the twilight air as Clara recounted a story about a runaway horse and a pie-eating contest back in Ohio. Jebediah, mesmerized, watched the flames dance in her wide, gray eyes. He'd offered her his stew again, coaxing her to eat more, and this time she hadn't refused. Her laughter, still a little weak, was a melody he never knew he craved. The next morning, Jebediah showed her how to split wood. Clara, though unsteady, insisted on helping. He guided her hands, the rough bark a stark contrast to her surprisingly soft skin. Like this, he murmured, positioning the axe. The scent of pine needles and Clara's faint lavender perfume filled the crisp air. He found himself lingering a moment too long, his fingers brushing hers. Later, as she swept the cabin floor, a wisp of hair escaping her loose braid, Jebediah caught himself staring. He imagined Clara planting wildflowers outside the cabin, their children playing in the tall grass. He envisioned years filled with shared laughter, quiet evenings by the fire, and the simple comfort of waking up beside her. It was a life he never dared dream of before. A warmth bloomed in his chest, a foreign feeling he recognized with a jolt, affection. But this affection was building on a dangerous secret. He pushed the thought away, watching Clara as she hung his freshly laundered shirt on a hook. How could he ever reconcile the woman he was falling for with the woman he knew she was? The sparrow revealed. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the cabin windows in their frames. Rain lashed against the wood, a relentless drumming that threatened to drown out even Jebediah's booming cough. He stoked the fire, the flames leaping higher, battling the encroaching chill. Clara huddled deeper under the quilt, her eyes wide and dark. A particularly violent gust tore at the cabin, and with a splintering crack, the latch on Clara's trunk gave way. The lid flew open, disgorging its contents across the floor: silk scarves, a worn leather-bound book, a silver locket, and a scattering of letters tied with faded ribbon. Amidst the chaos, a rectangular piece of paper, thicker than the rest, snagged on Jebediah's boot. He bent to pick it up, the firelight glinting off the bold lettering. Wanted. The face sketched beneath was undeniably Clara's, though harder, sharper. The description chilled him, the sparrow. For banditry, treason, and assault. Known to be armed and dangerous. Reward, $500. The words blurred as he reread them, each syllable a hammer blow to his gut. He looked up, his gaze locking with Clara's. Her face was pale, etched with a fear that mirrored his own. Clara, he managed, his voice a strangled rasp. The poster trembled in his hand, the sparrow revealed, a storm within the storm. A test of trust. Jebediah laid the crumpled poster on the rough-hewn table between them. The flickering lamplight danced across the grainy image, highlighting the severe angles of the woman's face. Wanted, the sparrow, notorious train robber, dead or alive. $5,000 reward. Clara's breath hitched. She stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. What is this? Recognize her? Jebediah's voice was flat, betraying nothing. His gut churned. The woman in the sketch bore a striking resemblance to Clara, to the curve of her jaw, the set of her eyes. No, she said too quickly. I've never seen this before in my life. Her hands, usually so steady when tending the chickens or mending his shirts, trembled visibly. He pushed the poster closer. Clara, look at it. Look at her. Tell me it isn't you. Her composure shattered. Tears welled, blurring the image on the table. All right, she choked out, her voice cracking. It's me. I am the sparrow. She covered her face with her hands, sobs racking her slender frame. Jebediah sank onto a stool, the weight of her confession pressing him down. The sweet scent of lavender, which always clung to her, now felt tainted. Could he reconcile the gentle woman who nursed his hound, the woman he was beginning to, with a hardened criminal? The law was clear, but his heart was a tangled mess. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a ruthless outlaw, but a broken woman. Was this all a clever act? Or was there truth in the desperation etched on her face? He didn't know, and that uncertainty felt like a blade twisting in his soul. Silas arrives. A prickle of unease made Dusty's fur stand on end, a guttural growl vibrating in his throat. He exploded off the porch, a torrent of barks echoing his challenge to the riders silhouetted against the horizon. Jebediah narrowed his eyes. That ramrod-straight posture was unmistakable even before the sunlight caught the glint of a star-shaped pin. Clemens. And flanking him, Silas. A shard of ice pierced Jebediah's resolve. He tightened his grip on the railing, the wood biting into his palm. They halted, their mounts kicking up miniature dust devils. Silas's gaze bored into Jebediah, a silent inferno of possessive rage. Jebediah, Clemens stated, his tone devoid of warmth, all business. We're looking for Clara. Any sign of her? Jebediah met their scrutiny, his pulse a frantic drum against his ribs. He pictured Clara burrowed in the cool earth of the root cellar, her fragile hope his burden. He thought of Silas, the relentless hunter, his possessive claim. He forced the words out, a coating of ash on his tongue. No, Sheriff. Haven't seen a soul for days. His voice remained even, a mask of nonchalance. Dusty, sensing the shift in his master, redoubled his barking, circling the horses with suspicion. Silas swung down, the rasp of his spurs on the parched ground cutting through the morning quiet. "Spare me the innocent act, Jebediah. We know she came this way." He advanced, casting a long shadow over Jebediah. The very air hummed with unspoken menace. Jebediah stood firm, the lie hardening into a bulwark. The hound's strident cries seemed determined to shatter the falsehood clinging to the air. The truth unveiled. Clara emerged from the cabin, the setting sun painting her face in harsh, contrasting light. She stood between Jebediah and Silas, a fragile figure against the looming tension. "He's not who you think he is," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "His name isn't Silas Bellwether. It's Silas Blackwood." A collective intake of breath swept through the small crowd that had gathered. Silas's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl. "Clara, don't be ridiculous." "Ridiculous? You forced me into it, Silas. The robberies, the—" She choked, unable to articulate the full horror. "I was escaping him," she finished, gesturing wildly. "He's a criminal, Jebediah. A dangerous one." Silas lunged for Clara, but Jebediah intercepted him, a roar tearing from his throat. The sheriff, initially stunned, drew his pistol. Dust swirled as Jebediah slammed Silas against the cabin wall, the weathered wood groaning under the impact. A fist connected with Silas's jaw, sending him sprawling. Clara scrambled back, fear etched on her face, as the sheriff, recovering his composure, tried to pull Jebediah off Silas. The hound, usually placid, barked furiously, sensing the violence in the air, its teeth bared at Silas. The fight became a chaotic tangle of limbs and angry shouts, the setting sun casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. A new beginning. Clara remembered the ravine Silas planned to use as an escape. She led the posse through the dense undergrowth, pointing out the barely visible deer trail that intersected with Silas's intended path. "He'll think he's lost them," she explained, her voice hoarse, "but this will bring us right above him." The trap worked perfectly. Silas, panting and covered in mud, emerged into the ravine, only to find the sheriff and his deputies waiting, rifles raised. He didn't resist, his eyes flat and empty. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the still morning air. As they led Silas away, Clara stood beside Jebediah, Dusty nudging her hand. "He'll pay for what he did," Jebediah said, his voice rough with emotion. The following days were a blur of legal proceedings and hushed conversations. Clara was offered a ticket back east, a chance to return to her old life. But the thought of the crowded city, the stifling expectations, filled her with dread. She looked at Jebediah's weathered face, at Dusty's unwavering loyalty, at the sprawling wilderness that had become both a prison and a sanctuary. "I'm staying," she announced one evening, the setting sun painting the cabin in hues of orange and gold. Jebediah looked at her, surprise and something akin to hope flickering in his eyes. "Are you sure, Clara?" She nodded, a newfound resolve hardening her gaze. "This is my home now." The scent of pine and wood smoke filled her lungs. The distant howl of a coyote, a comforting lullaby. A new beginning, forged in hardship and laced with the promise of peace.